welcome to the Games of the Week. I'm Grandmaster Denes Boros, and we're going to look through games of a legend that you just seen just a second ago, probably. Maybe you haven't, but now you're gonna make that up as this event, Play for Russia, a certain legend was playing, and he was Vladimir Kramnik. And what is actually fascinating in these games that he played, that he just goes through all his phases. So he plays positionally, then back to tactics, then back to positional chess. You never know what's going on. So in this lecture, we're going to figure out which Kramnik are we watching at the moment. So with that, let's get started with this game between Kramnik versus Nepomniachtchi, the current candidate player, who's still playing technically in the candidates. Yet, the candidates is on a hold. A permanent hold? We shall see. Alright, so this game was played between Kramnik and the candidate Nepomniachtchi, who is actually at the leaderboard up there. So c4, c5, g3, and this is considered to be a slightly sleepy / boring opening. However, in this variation, Giri couldn't breach Nepomniachtchi's defenses. Not only that, Nepomniachtchi even won that game. That actually catapulted him into the leaders. But back to this game, probably Kramnik wanted to play as solid as possible, just going against Nepomniachtchi's urge to get complications. g6, bishop g2, knight c3, knight c6, e3, e6. Now, if you know Kramnik's affection for Smyslov and his games, you will guess his next move. And if you don't know Smyslov, you'll never guess it, so I'm just gonna show it on the board. It's b3. Why is this such a big thing? Well, Smyslov really liked the double fianchetto, and Kramnik, as a big fan of Smyslov, wanted to try it out as well. So the point of b3 is the following. So in a beautiful world, I'm just making some random moves here. White could go ahead, try to exchange this bishop on g7 and still have an unopposed bishop on g2. That is in general the essence of Kramnik's plan. But instead, here b3, knight e7, he plays bishop a3, which is a very exciting move by Kramnik. He's actually moving it all the way to a3 instead of b2, which would be a bit more logical. However, he has a plan in mind. b6, knight e2, castle, castle, bishop b7. And here he gets to play d4, which he couldn't play if the bishop was on b2, because he wouldn't win the time and he wouldn't have pressure on the c5 pawn. Again, this is the typical positional Kramnik that we see here. He's trying to inch ever so close to glory, and in this case, he actually gets a little bit of a push. Why? Because most sides have these bishops fianchettoed. Nepo has those bishops on b7 and g7. White does, so that would even out. However, with this bishop lurking on a3, there are certain threats after, let's say, c takes, e takes d4. This bishop will immediately put pressure on black's position, and if d5, and oftentimes c5 would be an alternative, and with this bishop being stronger than the b7 one, white can hope for a little advantage, even with some moves as b4, b5. Instead, Nepo plays d6. But d6 actually invites a structure that we can only describe as tiers. That is the Benoni. And if you ask any grandmasters or anyone who ever watched a broadcast of a candidates tournament, you'd know it's not a fun thing to play and it only leads to suffering. Therefore, the tiers. So Queen D2, and here Nepo plays Knight A5, which is an interesting idea, trying to get sort of a hedgehog type of position and trying to hold that position. But Kramnik, being very well aware that this is a Benoni structure, he is just eager to play D5 right there. E takes, C takes D5, Bishop A6. So this is, by the way, one of the worst type of Benonis. The bishop is already on B7 where it's not supposed to be. It's supposed to be on D7. And there's a knight on A5 on the rim, just acting grim. Not a good thing. Just all those guys lurking around in the corner, not doing so hot. So here, let's try to find Kramnik's next move. For the moment, we can say White is doing all right, more than all right, because he has control over the center and potentially can get even more pawns right there. And the side pawn with F4. However, you still need to be accurate in this game of chess if you ever hope to get an advantage. So let's try to find out what was Kramnik's next move. Dear viewers, let's get thinking. So first off, you always have to check for threats, and there are plenty. Now Nepo is famous for being an aggressive player, so there are plenty of threats. There are threats on E2 and threats on the knight on C3. And even after bishop E2, knight E2, there's bishop takes A1. Now that's not the exchange you dream about, but it is an exchange. So noticing these type of threats, that actually might guide you towards the best move, which was actually played by Kramnik. I see rook E1 suggested. I do not know which rook though. If you could pinpoint which one would you want to play, that'd be great. B4. However, B4 could run into knight C4 ideas, and suddenly this terrible bishop becomes a real ninja, bothering both the bishop and the queen, and in fact, black is the one who's calling the shots. The F rook. So the problem with rook Fe1, that you still didn't solve bishop takes E2's problem, and your rook on A1 would be hanging. Somebody was mentioning bishop B2, and indeed. And this is again typical grandmaster play. They sense danger and they stop it before it ever happens. So not only did he get this bishop to B2, he might even get knight E4 in there and try to put pressure along the diagonal. And again, it's the same game plan for white here. You have a good fianchettoed bishop. Exchange off this guy on G7 and you are guaranteed to have an advantage. So realizing that this bishop is not that great, Nepo took on E2, takes knight F5. And again, here comes the big question. How should we continue? Should we take on G7? Should we wait with that? Rook C1, that is a very natural move. It doesn't do much, however, you do bring and develop your rooks into the game. A decent enough move, however, let's try to find something even stronger. So in the opening, you still fight for something called the center. And the more of you get it, the happier you get. Really, it's like chocolate cake. If you get more of it, you'll be super happy. The less you get, the more unhappy the whole day will get. E4, indeed. Now E4 here is actually the most accurate move. Now you might want to take on G7 first, however, this has a downside. Because if you play Queen B2 now, then Black can go Queen F6, and after these exchanges, Black might get some counterplay with B5 C4. So E4 is the most accurate because not only it takes away any potential knight D4 jumps, because that would just lose a pawn, but it also forces this knight back to E7. Bishop B2, Queen takes B2, knight G7. And that is again an unhappy fianchettoed knight. Rook D1, just over defending that D5 square. Again, you see who's happy now. White is happy because he has all them pawns in the center. Queen E7, and Queen E7 just doesn't really feel right because it runs into Rook E1, and anytime there'll be EF, Knight F4s will come with the tempo and the Queen will be in danger. Rook E8, and it's time to get a more bigger bite of the cake, and he gets F4 in. Not only does he have all those pawns, he also takes away this important E5 square from Black. So from a theoretical perspective and a positional perspective, White's position is just much, much better. I even dare say winning. Rook D8. And again, let's try to channel a bit of Kramnik's positional excellence. We already have a really nice position, but can we pinpoint a piece that is a little bit still awkward and needs to be regrouped? Can you find the piece and the move in this position for White? Yep, obviously this knight on E2 is super awkward, so going to C3 is just perfect. Now the bishop might not be ideal, however, it does its duty of defending both the D5 and the E4 pawns, which is perfect. Knight C1, the problem with knight C1, it doesn't really have a perspective. Now if you was to say knight C1, knight D3, knight F2, knight G4, knight F6, you are either a genius or you have all of the time on this planet. But probably you really don't, because they'll just play H5 and this whole journey was for nothing. However, after knight C3, there is a big plan that Kramnik is playing for. Namely, he wants to get his knight to E4, and if that happens, it is a game over. Because as soon as this knight lands on F6, there is not much you can do about it. It's gone. Queen F6, trying to stop White from jumping around. But can you stop Vladimir Kramnik from playing like a tactician in 2020? I doubt it. E5. He goes all in, doesn't care about the pawn. He just wants to get that knight to E4. DE, knight E4. Not only hitting the queen, but activating the queen as well. On B2. Queen B, F5, FE. Now Queen E5 is something that comes with a parental advisory of knight F6 check, and your queen is falling. If you take on F6, queen takes F6, and that's all. you're down a queen and losing. So rook takes e5, played here. And it is white to move and win. And just a reminder, in chess, if you find a winning move, try to find a move that wins even more. Exactly. So knight f6 seems to be winning. However, the dastardly rook f1 is much, much better. And obviously, Kramnik, when he saw knight f6, he probably said, no, 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 I'm trying to win your queen instead. Because if you go knight f6, queen e5, probably you're winning. However, nothing as good as winning a whole rook or the lady. If queen h5, then yes, you save the rook on e5. However, knight f6 and that family fork is going to hurt. And again, if you move the queen anywhere else, let's say just c8, for example, queen takes c5, and you're down a rook and no compensation. So rook f1, so Nepo had to go for broke and take on e4, but as we all know, that is not a good sign. It's already kind of lost for Nepomniachtchi. Takes, takes, queen f6, rook d7, rook e1. When you're up material, you exchange. Knight e8, queen f3, forcing the exchanges. Takes, takes, knight d6, queen f6. And one of those things that I learned just recently, whenever you're having a winning position, make sure you don't take your foot from the gas. You still have to go for mate. You still have to play like you don't have the advantage. Knight b7, and here comes our favorite move. If you're a Bent Larsen fan, you would know which move I'm talking about. So it's Kramnik to play and play Bent Larsen's favorite march. Try to find it. It is actually remarkable. h4. The pawn marches up to h6 and sets up this beautiful h6 queen g7 mating concept. h4 played, h5. Can you stop Kramnik from attacking? No, you can't. g4. Just breaking it open. H takes and marches on the Larsen pawn. It's going to h6. I mean, if you take, I check you and take stuff, and you're just losing. King h7, king g2, knight f5, takes, takes, and the rook shows up on h1 with deadly threats, and it's checkmate with rook h8. So this was one of those Kramnik games where he actually showed his positional side, and he said, nah, I'm just kidding. I'm going in for the attack. e5, knight e4, and rook f1. Rook f1 is actually probably the most elegant solution there, even though probably knight f6 would have won as well. But talking about more of a tactical but original way of playing, let's take a look at this game between Riazantsev and Kramnik. And in this game, it starts off slow. He plays this funky little move of c3. I don't advise you to do this. It's not a good move. Probably he wanted to push it twice, but they said, c3 will be fine. c6, bishop f4, g6, and we get into this very standard sort of position. Bishop e2, knight d7. Now, if this would be played in, let's say, 2010, you'd say and guess Kramnik's next move 100%. It's going to be castles and play positionally. However, we write the date 2020 and Kramnik is on a totally different planet. So, it is for you, dear viewer, to actually channel your inner Kramnik and make this fairly slow position exciting. Go! Yep, so one of those big deals in this position is the following. Everything is kind of tedious and fairly boring. However, that bishop went from c8 to f5, and Kramnik spots that and says, hey, what are you going to do with that bishop? Not much. If you go back, knight g5, and after taking on e6, that is a positional advantage for white for sure, and this is probably an easy position for Kramnik to play. So g4, bishop e4. This is not the end of the story. If Riazantsev could get away with knight takes c4, knight takes c4, probably the equilibrium would still stay. But he's already playing like 2020 Kramnik. Goes g5. The point being, if you move the knight away, I take on e4, de, knight d2. And not only do I have the bishop pair, I also have a target on e4, which more likely than not gonna win. So g5, bishop takes f3 was a must as played by Riazantsev. Bishop f3, knight e8, our second tabia position. So Kramnik did succeed in achieving to get the bishop pair against the knights, so it's already sort of unbalanced. But your Kramnik, you're not quite satisfied yet. What move would satisfy Kramnik's wish to make this game super sharp and exciting? And the move is h4. He says, okay, you don't have a knight on f6 anymore to defend your king side, so I'm just gonna throw pawns at you and try to checkmate. e5, a very nice move by Riazantsev. If your opponent is playing on the flank, you strike in the mid, in the center. Now here comes the big question. Do we take on e5? As we have the bishops, we would love to have those bishops have some open diagonals. Not here, not at all. Bishop g3. The reason he doesn't take, because knight takes c5, even bishop e5 makes sense. Why? Because in this case, black would get rid of white's bishop pair, and these knights would get some juicy outposts on e4 and c4. This would be a pretty brilliant position for black to play. And noticing that these knights are not really that active at the moment, he says, no, no, no. You do you, I'm not going to help you get these knights closer to these outposts. Knight d6, anyways, getting closer to these Nice outposts on f5 and c4. Bishop g4. And even though Kramnik is bent on playing aggressive chess, he still notices when there are positional ideas. So he's stopping knight f5 from happening, and if that would happen, he would just snap it off the board and be happy, because that pawn would become a weakness and a target for the lady. So here, takes, queen f3, and that pawn would be a target for the queen. So rook e8, noticing that the king is in the center. Rook e8, and that looks annoying. However, Kramnik does not panic and plays this little move of queen f3. The point is the following. If you take on d4, there's still a knight hanging on d6, so you still can't do this. So summing up, he get the bishop pair, some targets. He is threatening to open up the position with h5. However, what will be Kramnik's next move? And one of those things are very important in chess. If you play a move, it is advised for you to know what will be your next move. So what is Kramnik planning to do after queen f3? So if you just think with chess principles in mind, white is trying to play on the flanks, so black is trying to strike in the mid or the center. And if your opponent is trying to attack you in the center, what do you want to do with your king? You want to evacuate castle long. You want to get out of the way of that danger. Knight b6, defending that d6 knight, but just in the nick of time, Kramnik gets to castle. And as we talked before, Kramnik 2020, we're going for checkmates. Knight c4, knight takes. So the reason he takes on c4 is the following. He really wants to get rid of that knight. Also, this d2 knight is not doing that much, so it's a good exchange. Knight takes c4. And seeing that there could be some danger with queen b6 and that queen and knight combo can be annoying, he drops back with the queen, just over defending the b2 pawn. a5, queen c2. So if I show you this structure of e takes, c takes, d4, what does this remind you? Structurally or opening-wise? What opening does this look like? And that's very important, by the way, because it helps you, guide yourself and know what can possibly happen in this type of position. Can you call this a King's Indian type of position? A Grunfeld? A QGD maybe? It is definitely more like a QGD. Sometimes, surprisingly enough, you get similar positions in the Grunfeld. But one of those big deals in the Carlsbad / QGD, so Queen's Gambit accepted positions, is the following. Oftentimes, black is going to try to attack you. However, 9 times out of 10, white won't get checkmated. So that is a good news for Kramnik. a4 was played, so it's trying to push the pawn up to a3. Bishop e2, just attacking the knight. b5, de. Now de is sort of releasing the tension and also trying to eliminate that intruder on c4. Bishop e5, takes. And here comes a very nice defensive idea by Kramnik. Try to find it. First off, what is black threatening? Well, black is really threatening to go either b4 or a3. So we really need to find a defensive idea to stop that from ever happening. And if we do, black's attack is probably just gonna run out of steam. Did he have to switch to defense? Well, he felt it's safest to first defend and then see if he has an attack. Yep, obviously a3. The easiest way to stop your opponent from playing a3 is if you play a3 yourself. Queen e7 and king b1 is that your typical Sicilian move, just running away from any potential trickery if the c-file was to open up anytime in the future. Rook e8, bishop d3, just pressing on that g6 pawn. Also, just hinting at the idea of h5. Knight d6, rook h3. And again, this is typical Kramnik. He doesn't rush with the h5 break, even if you could play it. He prepares this onslaught first and then he goes for h5. Are we not worried about knight a5, knight b3? Not really. Unless there's a tactical idea behind it, you don't really care about these maneuvers. Knight d6, rook h3, c5, and now this is actually getting a bit more dangerous with b4, as Riazantsev would try to open it up on the b file. But as I mentioned to you before, this will look a lot like a Carlsbad structure where white usually doesn't get checkmated. So it's not going to happen here either. Rook h1, just doubling on the h, b4, ab, queen a4, ba, queen takes a3. Why doesn't white get checkmated? Well, as you can see, white has a queen defending the b2 pawn, a bishop close by, and in 2 moves, a rook can help out and aid in the defense. So white just have way more defenders than black has attackers, and that's the reason why white's chances of surviving an attack is higher than being mated. Rook b8, also to talk about the fact that he goes h5 now, and h takes g6 is just very strong. If that ever happens, let's say takes, h takes is brutal. You can't even capture back because rook h8 and you lose the b8 rook. So you've got to go for some desperado, and Riazantsev does so. And enter the endgame. Queen e7, a very nice little touch. And as I told you, you never get into trouble in these Carlsbad structures. If rook b2, king c1, and if rook e7, there's bishop c4. And the rook is falling. You do not have time to pin me because you've got to treat that rook. Rook e7, bishop c4, dc, h takes, fg. And here comes the big question. Here comes the big question. How to continue in this position? The attack clearly petered out. There's not much going to happen over there. So you must switch gears now in this position. Yep, rook c1 is an idea, f4. So we're clearly in the endgame, correct? And if that is so, we're still deep in the endgame. Which one is the strongest piece of all? The king. So let's just bring this king up. Not only bother that c-pawn, actually might come handy when we want to play for f4s. Yeah? Rook b7, king c3. Now, if black would take on b2, that would leave this h-pawn unpre, and this king would be very much in danger. So rook c8 was played instead. Rook h4. So white is actually a king up, as this king is just stuck there defending the h7 pawn, while this king is fighting like a true warrior. Rook b3, king c2. Now, again, you've got to treat that pawn. He goes rook b5, saying, giving up the pawn, which is kind of strange. But here, instead of taking, Kramnik decides to just keep the rook here on g4, defending the pawn and attacking the c4 guy. Rook b8, rook b1. So it's just saying, hey, in the long run, you lose the c-pawn and I'll have the passer. And you have nothing to brag about as black. Rook there, rook c4, king c3. Now, just a reminder, this whole charity event was actually a blitz format. So they didn't have like oceans of time to figure out things. So this seems like a very nice practical choice by Kramnik. He says, I don't want to risk my advantage. I really just want to use this pawn as a way to win the game. Rook g5, b4. And this is an ideal concept. He has a rook supporting this pawn and a rook behind the pawn. Not even talking about the fact that there's a king around that is very useful when you're in a mid of a rook and pawn endgame. Rook f3, rook e4, not giving pawns for free, and also cutting off the king from ever getting close to that b7 square. Mind you, if Riazantsev could get that king to b7, there'd be good chances of holding. But that's just a dream. In this position, it's unlikely to happen. Rook b5, and here you can see the king advantage. White is ready to play king c4, just driving that rook away. Rook b6, b5. Rook f5, just trying to cut off the king, so there's no more king c5 moves. But here, again, white plays that typical move that you should be able to find whenever in your endgame studies. It's white to move and play. Try to find Kramnik's next move. So if you found the idea of getting a rook on the 7th rank, well, congratulations, that's where your rook belongs to. Rook e7. You get your rook over there and you will be hinting at some back rank checkmates after that. Not only you cut the king again, it can't really move around, otherwise he'll lose the pawn, but also you set up a second threat, which is so important. h5. Now he doesn't go for this. Instead, he goes for rook c7 and plans to get rid of this blockader. And once that blockade is gone, that b pawn is just going to queen. h4, rook c6, takes, king g7. So Riazantsev's last hope is to give up a rook for the c-pawn and run with his own pawns. c7, rook f2, sneaky little trick. If you queen, you'll turn out to be sad as you lose the queen with rook c2 check. However, he has this nice little move of king d3, taking away all these squares from the rook. It had to go back. And after rook b8, black resigned, because there's no way you can stop white from promoting to a queen after rook f8 and promotion. So what we kind of learned from this game is, yes, it is good to attack, but if you have a better king and endgame, hey, that's the endgame you want to play. Just like we've seen in this game between Kramnik and Riazantsev. So, last but not least, let's take a look at another classic from this event, and that is played between Kramnik and the World Championship challenger, Sergey Karjakin. So c4, knight f6, a good old English, e5, and plays this d3. And this is something you would call sort of the Rouser Sicilian with reversed colors. d5, takes, e4. In Rousers, usually you see e3, but e4 is a normal move in these positions as well. Knight f6, bishop c5, bishop e3. If any of you are familiar with Sicilians, this is basically white playing a Sicilian defense with up a tempo. And then they'll see if that's enough for something. h3. So the fight usually is revolving around the d4 square. So Kramnik plays h4. So there won't be bishop g4 ideas. And if you go knight d4, you still have to tend for this e5 pawn. Castles, castles, rook e8, rook c1. Now knight d4 ideas don't really work yet, because takes, well, if you take with the e-pawn, white can go knight a4 and possibly have a little advantage because of this protected pawn. And if you take bishop d4, knight d4, you can't take the queen because there's knight b5 hitting the queen and the c7, and then you're probably going to get forked pretty soon. So instead he plays h6, a3, bishop e6. He maneuvers the knight to c5. Again, we're back to maneuvering Kramnik. Knight a4, queen d6, knight c5. And this is actually pretty annoying because you wouldn't want to give up that bishop, because if you do, not only does white have the bishop pair, he is probably going to push you off the board on the queen side as well. So here, Karjakin played the sad move, bishop c8, which is not good, and it doesn't look pretty either. b4, a6, just trying to stop b5, queen c2, knight h5. And as Kramnik decided that, hey, I have the advantage here, I do not need to go for any complications, he didn't go for the move. Maybe he missed it, we do not know, but here is the chance for you to shine, as it is white to move, and he has a splendid little tactical idea here. It's white to move and play. Kramnik actually didn't play it. So here, in this position, white has this brilliant idea of knight takes e5, which is outstanding because, yeah, you attack that knight. However, I could take with the queen, take with the rook. Both will defend that h5 knight. However, it turns out, after f4, there's nothing you can do about it. If you go knight f4, bishop f4, and you have some issues. And if you go here, counterattacking, f takes c5 comes with a tempo on the queen, and you don't have time to take on f1. So incredible as it may seem, this knight takes e5, f4 idea would have given Kramnik a big advantage even at move 17. But okay, as I told you guys before, Kramnik, if he has the advantage, doesn't really like to go into tactical adventures unless he is pretty sure that everything is going his way. Or at least that was his style in the early days. Queen f6, and he gets the coveted d4 move. And as you might know, if you get d4 in the Sicilian, doesn't matter which color you are, you're probably gonna be better, especially if you're up a tempo. d4, he takes, knight takes d4. So not only does black have lots of pieces still sitting in the garage, that e8 rook, c8 bishop, and rook on a8, he also doesn't have any central control, and that's a problem. Not even talking about that knight on h5. Knight d4, bishop d4, queen g5. Now here Kramnik plays this very nice move of bishop takes h5, just eliminating any sorts of counterplay that Karjakin could have in this position. Bishop h5, queen h5, f3. Yes, it does come at a cost of losing the bishop. However, in this position, with that bishop still being stuck there defending that b7 pawn, this is fairly pleasant for Kramnik. a5, queen f2, ab, queen g6, king h1. So with this solid center, he is in no rush to show his intentions. He's actually waiting for Karjakin to show his intentions. c6. And Kramnik's next move is, again, showing some great understanding. So get your positional rush ready and try to find what the big Vlad play in this position. In fact, it's not that hard to find if you kind of anticipate black's next move. Black obviously is trying to get more space than he had before. He plays this remarkable move of g4. Now g4 would be frowned upon everywhere on the planet if it wasn't really played by Kramnik. However, this move has a great point. Black wanted to play f5, so if you just dilly-dally with rook c4, there's going to be f5, and if these bishops actually activate, there'll be some counter chances for Sergey Karjakin. However, after g4, there is no more breaks for black. And one of those things that Kramnik does best is to kill his opponent's counterplay. So g4 is just an amazing move by Kramnik. Rook a3, and now they play the move suggested by you, dear chat, rook a1, just getting rid of the active rook on a3. Again, he is just trying to smother that bishop on c8 and making sure that Karjakin doesn't get any sort of counterplay. Rook a1, bishop takes a1. f6. Now again, Karjakin also sees that this bishop is awfully strong, that is pretty strong, So he decides just to block it up. King g2, again, slowly improving. Bishop c7, bishop c3, h5, queen h4. Probably h5, even though visually appealing, it has a problem. It actually opens up the situation for white. So the best idea for Karjakin would have been just to sit and wait and see what white is going to do. Because white is still far away from actually breaking through in the center. However, that's probably Kramnik's goal. He played h5, and after queen h4, he's actually at a dilemma. If you take, you open up the position for my rook and queen, and I might actually intrude with your bishops just shut out of the action, which is going to happen on the h file. So Karjakin decides to play b6 instead and just wait it out. Knight d3, queen f7. Queen takes h5, saying, okay, a pawn is a pawn and might help me to win the game. Queen takes h5, gh, king h7. Probably Karjakin evaluated this position as being good. I have the bishop pair. What can possibly go wrong? I'm just going to go king h6, king takes h5, and have a fantastic position. However, the big Vlad calculated further than that. Can you spot Vladimir Kramnik's next move? And probably that move was what clinched the game for Kramnik. So the problem child here is the h5 pawn. The question is, how can white fight against intrusions by that king on h7? I mean, bishop d2 makes sense. However, you do give away the d file. You don't want to give away the d file. So I'll be honest with you, Kramnik didn't quite stop it. However, he came up with a really nice tactical defense. He went knight f2. He's planning to go knight g4. So white really has to go king h6. Knight g4, check. Now if you take, and white is just up a pawn and completely winning. But what happens if black takes on h5? Boom, bishop takes f6. And that's a very nice sacrifice, probably missed by Karjakin. Normally there would be bishop takes g4 and taking on f6, but hop, it's a check. You've got to move your king, and I move back. Even so here, you can even take on g7, check, and win the whole house with rook d7. So that is a cute little double sacrifice with bishop f6 and bishop takes g7. Probably well spotted by Kramnik there. Probably in advance. So he went king h7, but that does not help you. Bishop takes f6. And this is the double trick. Takes, gf, rook d7 check, and you lose the bishop. So even here, bishop f6 works. I didn't talk about g takes f6 at all, but the reason I didn't talk about it, because it's a fork. You've got to move the king, and knight takes e8. Now, this tragedy would be compounded if you go king g7, because you would run into another fork, which would be kind of uncomfortable. So bishop f6 was played, bishop e6, and this happy bishop moved back to c3. c5, you're up a pawn, so you're happy to exchange bc, bc, and h6. If you take, there's again knight f6, and you're getting forked, so that's kind of annoying. Bishop g4, hg, king takes h6, and surprise, surprise, the bishop strikes again. Bishop takes g7. King takes g7, then there's rook d7. Same old story. Your bishop is gonna be a gouner, and it's gonna be 2 pawns indeed. King g6, bishop c3, just making sure everything's defended. There's no reason to keep this bishop on pre there. Rook b8, e5, start rolling those pawns. Rook b3, rook c1, just over defending. c4, f4, and these tanks are just starting to roll. There's not much you can do about this. As black, bishop b6, you still have to be careful, by the way. King f3, bishop a5, and it's you who lose. So even in a winning position, you've got to stay vigilant. e6, bishop e3, trying to be a nuisance, but f5 check does come in time. King g5, rook c2, king g4, f6, and these pawns are near unstoppable. Bishop g5, e7, rook b8, rook e2, and f7. And there's not much that black can do here. He could have safely resigned, but probably, with both being in time trouble, they played on. Queens, rook c2, queen c8, queen takes c4, and basically the game is over. King e2, king h6, king d3. This is just winning. Bishop e5, in cornering the king and asking, where are you going to bring that rook? If you go rook d1, queen f3 check, and I take your rook. Rook a6, but that's not gonna fare any much better. Queen h7, just a little bit of repetition. Bishop d4, so there's no side checks. Rook a2, bishop e3, rook a4, king f3, and there's no defense against the big threat of queen takes g5. So here, Sergey Karjakin resigned. A very nice game by Kramnik, and as you can see, 2020 Kramnik is the modern Kramnik. So if you loved his chess, stay in tune, because probably he's going to play more rapid and blitz in the future, and we hope to see some more fireworks with that. I really hope you enjoyed this lecture, and have a great day or night wherever you are. Bye-bye.